This is the Fujikura ribbon splicer. Got to be careful with the lid because that pops off. First thing you can do is pull out the splicing machine. Set it over on the side. This here has a handle on it. These are loose, so you got to be careful picking it up that you don't dump it. You lift this up and the cleaver is down here in this container. You have a battery that's down over there. And then the rest of the parts you're going to need are up in here. The plugs. And the stripper. And then I have some sleeves that are in there. Alright, this is the cleaver. This box is a bit of a pain to open sometimes. But here's the cleaver. There's a little switch on the side that keeps this stowed. You just hold that down a little bit, flick that switch, it'll pop open. We'll go over that a little bit more. These little brushes are for some cleaning, so generally take them out. These are the chucks or sleds, however you want to call them. We need those. And then that's it for the cleaver. Here we have the thermal stripper that strips the ribbons. Power button here, just hold it for a second. And this indicator is the temperature. Usually it'll stay on that setting most of the time. Sometimes you may have to raise the temperature to get it stripped properly. And a little button there, you push and hold that, this will start blinking. And every time you press it, it'll go to a different setting. And then whatever setting you want, you just leave it there and it'll stop blinking and it'll set that. This also has a battery in it, so if it's charged, you can get, I don't know how many strips out of it, but you don't have to have it plugged in all the time. These are the doors that open up, and you'll see how this operates once we start stripping. Alright, this is the machine. I haven't turned it on yet. Doesn't have a touch screen, so everything has to be done with the buttons, but there's a power button there. Just hold it for a second. Machine will start to turn on. Sometimes there's a screen on here that you need to accept before it'll start. This is the enter button. You would just hit that. It doesn't come up all the time. So there's your main screen. There's an open and close button here that will pop open the windscreen so you can see what the inside looks like. A ribbon machine uses precision V grooves for all the fibers to lay in. It will not automatically align them. So these grooves need to be pristine and clean. And the machine will just arc and feed the fibers together. So that's why it needs to be clean, because it can't individually align anything. These are the chucks or sleds that hold the ribbons that drop into the machine. I generally have it so that they're hinged on top. And the ribbon will be held in here, and you'll see that shortly. And these fit down in there over top of these posts. The same with this side. So that's pretty much with the machine. It will automatically be set to single mode and auto, so you won't really have to mess with any of the settings. There is a few different other ways to use the machine, which we can go over another time, but for generally splicing a 12 fiber ribbon to a 12 fiber ribbon, the machine will automatically already be set up for that. So we'll pull these out. This is a tray that was already set up that has 144 fibers on each side. There's 12 ribbons on each side here. And if we pull that out, you'll see that you can see all the blue ribbons are consistently setting on top here. And these ribbons need to be up on edge to be able to wrap around the tray. If a ribbon is flat, obviously it can't make the turn very well, and you don't want excessive twists in it because it will make it very difficult to get it trayed. Whatever color side is up on one side of the tray, you want that to be the same on the other. If you're building the tray and the fiber really wants to lay with the aqua side up, there's nothing wrong with that as long as the other side matches that. I generally like that blue side up, just a personal preference, but if it's a fight to do that, then go with the aqua side up. Okay, this is the all the ribbons are going to have some type of markings on them, so you know what's what. This particular cable is a 144 count, so there's going to be 12 ribbons in each cable. Now these will have numbers. Sometimes they're a little difficult to see. The top one here is number 5, and then over on the right you see that there's a hash mark. There's that little block. That's a symbol for 5. The next one down, it's fiber. It's not ribbon number 4, and it just has 4 hash marks. So 1 through 4 are just going to have hash marks. When you hit 5, it'll be a block. And then as you go higher, the bottom ribbon here is 12, so it has 2 blocks. Each of them is 5, so that adds up to 10, and then the 2 single hash marks. So you know that that's ribbon 12. The reason for that is if some fibers are stripped out of here and you can no longer read the number, chances are good you're going to still be able to see these hash marks and figure out what ribbon it is. I have a suggestion whenever you're in a situation and you're peeling fibers out of a ribbon, excuse me, that at some point before it disappears into the tube, put a little piece of tape or something around the ribbon so that it's not possible to peel a fiber past that point. Then you'll always be able to read that ribbon. There's been situations where people have peeled out all 12 fibers and you can't read anything on the ribbon anymore. So it makes it impossible to know which ribbon that the particular fiber was assigned to. So it's a good practice to make sure there's something always readable no matter what work is done. Now this is typical plastic ribbon, 12 count obviously, blue through aqua in the proper order. Then what we also have is what's called spider ribbon, which is much more flexible. It's still in ribbon form, but the fibers are kind of stuck together like a mesh, or almost like a Chinese finger, if you know what that is. This is pretty interesting because it can be spliced like a regular ribbon. Individual fibers can just be pulled out easily, and it's very forgiving when you're traying it because even though they're stuck together, it's flexible enough to act like loose fiber. So this is relatively newer on the market, but it gives you a lot of flexibility. But for today, we're just going to be dealing with the plastic ribbon, as this is more difficult to tray and there's more details you need to follow so that you're not fighting it as you're trying to tray it. All right, I just want to go over a couple of things before we start splicing. As far as underneath here, you want to be careful that you don't pull on the ribbons, and if you watch down here, you'll see if I pull on that, you're going to pull it out of the basket. So we want to make sure that these stay set in there. And then in the tray, the proper prep length to work these, I'm just going to wrap these not too neat just so you can see how long they need to be. But you go around the tray once, and if you look underneath, see what happened? It's still pulled. So with these laying properly in there, an ideal prep length is once around the tray and close enough to the end of the tray here, and you can snip them off. You can see where these ribbons are roughly going to the end of the tray. This works out well once they're stripped and spliced. You'll have one neat wrap in here, and they will land in the individual slots in the chip. Same thing with the other side. So with that being said, once your fibers are laid out, you'll want to see what kind of order that they're in, always trying to keep it in a neat bundle whenever possible. It's just easier to work. So this one here is, this is our number 1. So everything else you want to just get out of the way. Our first ribbon, and then when we go to our second, we can just grab it off of this stack and then work with them that way. If it is in the other order, if our number 1 was here, you would just get the rest out of the way bend them around the other way. It's kind of personal preference, but because the ribbon is very unforgiving as far as working with it, you want to keep things as organized as possible. And the same thing goes with the other side here, where if we look, this is ribbon, so 11 and 12 are near that end. I think my number 1 is going to be in the back. But sometimes they can jump over each other and they won't be in a perfect sequence. So it looks like our number 4 ended up in the back. And then 2. There's 1. Sometimes they'll do that. They'll jump the queue a little bit, but either way, you still want to try to be organized. So there's our number 1 ribbon for one side, our number 1 for the other. Now, very important is how you work with these. We had our blue side up, so in our chips, that blue fiber needs to be up as well. What we want to avoid is any twists in the ribbon as we're working with it. So from here, I have the blue fiber up on top, and I keep it that way all the way over. I grab a splice sleeve. You can put these on any way you want, but just try to be consistent so they lay in the chips and they look neater. So when I put the sleeve on, I always put the clear side up, and without having any twists introduced, ribbons are laying flat. In this case, if my blue is up on top on both sides, the blue fiber is going to be furthest to the back side of the machine. So it will be laying in the machine this way. This is the chuck or the sled, however you want to call it, and you roughly protrude past about that amount. You'll get the hang of it and be able to eyeball that pretty good. You want to make sure it's going straight through the chuck, and then let the lid close on it. Notice it's not shifting, it's not crooked, it's not binding anywhere. And then with your stripper, it will time out and shut off if it's laying for too long. So with it on, it's easy just to flip the doors open on it. You lay your chuck in the left hand side of it, and there's a magnet in there, so it will kind of hold it. And you want that seated in there. This symbol that's here, this little brown symbol or whatever, that's your length of your ribbon. Ideally it is between, it's within that orange area. So right now that's a decent length. You can go almost to the end. You don't want it too long and you don't want it too short. So if you stay within that sort of window there, you're fine. When you close that one, that's just to hold the chuck in there and you can put your thumb on there. When this lid closes, it's going to start the timer for the heating process to be able to strip this. You close that and you want to squeeze them together, and you'll notice that ready light turned green, and that's when you can pull this apart. And you can see now we have the bare glass exposed. It's been stripped, and what it peeled off is this piece right here. Now at the very end of that, you can see where it looks squiggly. I tend to call that confetti. If your stripper is too hot, it's going to make this entire scrap piece nothing but confetti, and it's going to lay in here and you have to blow it out or whatever. With it slightly cooler, most of your scraps are going to be in a solid piece like this, and they're easier to discard. So that's why generally for plastic ribbon, it's going to be in this position. You may have to vary that for different cables. So this is held in the magnet. When you pull this out, you also don't want this to push in, because if the glass hits here, you're going to end up breaking it. So there is your ribbon, and just like any other fiber, take some alcohol, fold it in half. You don't want to bunch this glass up and squeeze it because they'll break easier. So keeping it flat, you can clean it, and I'm going to show you with a more wet Kim wipe. If it shows up, you can see that the glass is more bunched up. You don't want it to stay that way in the cleaver, because there's a good chance when you close the cleaver and the blade comes over and everything that these will break because they're laying on top of each other. So you can flick them at the end to kind of get them to fan out neater. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but you don't really want them bunched up. Then with this particular style cleaver here, once it's open, you press here to push the carriage back. This chuck snaps in over here. You lay the front side of it or the back side of it in first, and then drop it down. You also want to be conscious of what you're banging the ends of this glass into. There will be scraps on that end, but if you bend them too far, they will break, and you'll have to strip it all over again. When this sets in here, you want to be sure to push the chuck so it's fully seated in this direction. Main reason for that is so that your cleaves are consistent, and also on the off chance that not every fiber gets cleaved off, you have an opportunity to try to cleave it again and to make sure that that odd one is going to be cleaved at the same length as all the others. If you're inconsistent in where this chuck is in the cleaver and you try that second cleave, that fiber could be much longer or possibly even shorter than the others, and the machine won't allow you to splice it that way. So always make sure that you're pushed all the way over to the right and this is in there, and I usually just put some downward pressure to hold it. And with this cleaver, there's only one step. You push it like a stapler, and that's it. And when you pull it out, you have 12 nicely cleaved fibers, ideally. And then you come over to the machine. The precision V-grooves that are on either side of the electrodes, you kind of go in on a bit of an angle so that they'll lay in there, and then drop it down over these pins. If you come in close, you'll see that initially all the fibers won't be laying in the V-grooves. Sometimes they do, but most times they don't. So if you wiggle it a little bit, or even slightly lift it, move it around, you can get them all to pop in. Worst case, if they want to be fanned out a little bit, you can even use your finger and tap lightly to get them in the V-grooves, obviously not touching the ends of them because you need that to stay clean. So that's the first fiber in there. Now, your second fiber is crucial as well, with not having any twists in it. So when I come over here and I find my number one, and every time you want to double check which ribbon you have so you're not crossing ribbons. My blue side is up again, and I'm going to make sure there's no twists in it. Now for this back side, and this is very important, with it up like this, you're going to roll this towards you. So now when it's flat, your blue fiber is towards you, whereas it was away from you on this side. And the reason for that is because you're working on the other side of the machine. This will correct itself once we put it in there. So with the blue fiber towards you and no twists in it, you can grab your second chuck. Same procedure. Put that in there, making sure it's straight. And then with your stripper, it goes in there. This ribbon is still within the correct window for the length of it. Once you close this one, it'll start the heating process. And when that light turns green, you pull it apart. And you don't pull very hard. You want a relative smooth movement so you're not breaking any fibers. It will happen occasionally, and you'll have to cut it off and strip it again. But again, here, majority of the scrap will come out in one piece, and it can be discarded. Pull this out. Clean it. Usually one wipe is good. And flick a little bit. As the alcohol evaporates, they will fan out fairly well. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want a big glob of them. We reset the cleaver. There's a knob here for the trash can that you need to spin a few times. I'm going to set this down. I'll show you inside here. This has a set of brushes. And what they do is they grab the scrap that you've cleaved off, and when you turn this, they push it into the trash can area. So before every cleave, just give that knob a few turns. This goes in again, backside in first, snaps in, and we want to make sure it's pushed all the way over to towards the right. And then one step, the cleave. And you just check, it looks good. Sometimes it's harder to see. Now here's the tricky part. Depending on how you want to do it, I have no twists in this. This chuck is basically got to come around and it's going to go into this side of the machine. And what I did now, our blue fiber is on the same side as the other one. And there's no twist in here. So however you want to manage that yourself, that's the key. You don't want to introduce any twists in these ribbons, and you'll see that later on when we try to tray. And this gets dropped into the machine the same way as the other one, coming in on a bit of an angle. Drop it in, take a look, making sure that all the fibers go into the groove. And at this point, all you do is hit the set button. This machine, just to let you know, you can set it up to be more automatic, like our single fiber machines, but there's only a certain amount of time before the dust shield wants to snap shut, and it's a bit jarring. And most of the time when you set these in there, you got to take a second to jiggle it around to get them to set in the V grooves. So I have this set up more manual, so you have the time to do that without getting surprised by the windscreen wanting to close on it. So when you're ready, you hit the set button, you watch the screen. It does a cleaning arc, brings them together, and that's what you want to see. It just immediately starts splicing. It takes a little bit longer than single. Obviously you're arcing across 12, and in a second it will show your loss across all the fibers. That's very good. Obviously you want to go same guidelines, try to do dot 05 or better. To get a look at the fibers, this XY button up here will cycle you through different camera views and other data. If I hit it once, it's going to show gap, offset, cleave angles. Don't really need to see that. But then you'll see different camera angles where you can verify that there's actually not a bubble in here that the machine maybe didn't see. Everything looks very good. So at this point, you can hit the open and close. It'll open the windscreen. There's another critical moment here in getting the ribbons out of the chucks and into the oven without breaking any fibers. What I do, and hopefully you didn't forget to put your sleeve on, I will get this to slide up close, put my finger here to steady this, and these tables in here will still move back and forth. So you want to keep some tension on that bare glass. If I were to push towards my right, that glass would belly up and most likely some or all fibers would break. So I'm pulling to my left slightly just to keep that tension. And my finger is holding that ribbon so that when I open this chuck, it doesn't want to flop somewhere. So while I'm holding that, I will open that up. Now, I tend to like to get the sleeve even a little bit closer, so I will take and I'll hold it there, slide my sleeve over, and just holding this ribbon now with a little bit of tension, again, going to my left. Watch this table. This is what I mean. You can still move them. They're spring-loaded. So with this tension there, holding those fibers straight so they don't break, you can hold down this chuck and grab that lid to flip it open. And the idea as well, there's no twist in this and there's nothing wanting to pull this ribbon in any direction. So with this setting here, I'm not stressing those splices at all. But I can grab this, hold it taut as you would a single fiber, center your sleeve, and with this machine, the ribbon goes in flat the way you see it. Do not turn this up on edge. You would think it should go in this way, but it does not. It goes in flat. And you just drop it in there. I hold that tension on there until that squeeze is closed. You'll find that this oven works faster than the one on the Sumitomo. As you get going, while that one is cooking, you can grab your next fiber and sleeve it. Your screen will reset once you pull the chucks out of it. So what I'm going to show here is getting this out of the oven. Ideally, when you're working with ribbon, when you're done, you're not traying one at a time. They will all be trayed simultaneously. So you can take your chips out. This top bridge is nice because both of them are contained. They're easy to work with. Depending on how many you're splicing, one of these ribbon trays will hold 288 splices, 144 across 2 chips here, another 144 across these 2. Depending on how you lay things out, your first 144 may be on the bottom and your second on the top. It's kind of personal preference. What I like to do is, in this case, there's only the one set of 144. I like to put it onto the bridge. If any cables get introduced into this case and you do single splices where you'll have to peel a fiber out of here and do a single splice onto a new cable, you can put that into these. Ideally, when you work with cases that have ribbon and singles, what you should do is always take the ribbons out of the tray, completely out of the tray, do your single splice work, get them trayed, and the ribbons go back in last. You don't want to ever bury the ribbons underneath single spliced fibers. It makes it very, very difficult to do any further work with ribbon as far as breaking fibers out. It takes a few minutes, and there's a lot of cases out there that have already been buried, and it's very hard. But ideally, all the ribbons come out, and then they end up being nice and straight, and you do your single work and go back in. In this case, there are no singles, it's just ribbon. I'm going to be using this bridge because it's just easier. So I will set this out on the table. This is our spliced ribbon. Again, without putting twists in it and my blue fiber up, I'm just bringing this across and pushing this into the first slot. And I'll straighten these ribbons out. You can kind of set that so it's relatively straight. And then one ribbon at a time is done and brought into the chip as it's cooled. But again, the main thing is right now I have no additional twists in here. And when we go to tray, you'll be able to see why that's very important. So next ribbon, you find number 2 in this case, unless your design tells you otherwise. I'm looking at, that one says 4, so that's not the one I want. Sometimes they are hard to see. If the number is blurred, sometimes it's easier to look for the hash mark. Now that's number 5. These have gotten out of order because I've been jumbling them around a lot. But if you're careful when you first set up your enclosure, there's number 2. They will actually stay in order. It's not super critical, but it just makes it for being a little bit neater. So here I have the second one with the blue fiber up. I'll run this across to make sure there's no twists in it. Grab my sleeve and be consistent which way the sleeve goes on. Again, I always have the clear side up. If I can get it in there. Slide that on. Take your chuck or your sled. Make sure it's straight in there. Let's close the lid. There's magnets in there as well. Your stripper. Another thing here is there's blades in this stripper. So this needs to be clean. It's one thing I forgot to stress. When you're doing ribbon, you need to be so much cleaner in your work than you do with single. For one, in the machine, these precision V grooves, if there's even a tiny bit of dust in one of them, it will take a fiber and raise it up to where it will be out of alignment. The machine cannot align that single fiber. It'll tell you there's an offset, but with more dirt comes more frustration. So these grooves need to be clean, your cleaver, everything. Once you introduce some dirt in there, you'll have a frustrating time trying to get anything spliced, much worse than working with single fiber. So that being said, go back to the stripper, we close these, squeeze them closed, wait for the green light, slide these apart, and get the scrap out of there. You'll be able to see sometimes if it breaks one of the fibers off, you'll get an eye for that. You'll absolutely see it if you go through the cleave and lay it in the machine. There's only going to be 11 of them. Sometimes you'll see one just cut short, and then you just want to cut the glass off near the shortest fiber and have to strip a little bit more off of it. It's just the nature of the game. Sometimes they break. Clean it. Make sure they're not all the way bunched up. Now, depending on how good your eyes are, if you put these against a darker background, it may be easier to see the glass, depending on how old you are. And then into the cleaver again, backside first, it snaps in. This will slide a little bit, so you make sure you're all the way seated. And just push it closed. Now, what I forgot to do is give that a few turns. If you miss one or two, it's not going to be a big deal, but if you forget to turn this a lot, all your scraps are going to be stuck in this little channel over here, and they won't be in the trash can. So give that a few turns. And then drop this in the machine. A little bit of jiggle. They're all aligned in there. Lather, rinse, repeat. We look for number 2 ribbon on the back side. It's in here somewhere. That's 3. That's number 1. That's the one we just spliced. Sometimes it's a bit of a pain, especially when they're out of order. There's number 2. So, again, blue is up. I'll go across to make sure there's no twists. And for the right side of the machine, you just roll that towards you a half a turn. So that technically right now, this has the blue side to the back. Your other one now has the aqua side to the back. But it doesn't have a bunch of twists in it. That I can't stress that enough. You don't want this twisted up. So put it in this chuck. It's straight, let it close. It's easy to open this up. Just so you can flip both lids open. Lay that in there. Close it up and squeeze it. Wait for the green light. Slide it open. There's an example of it really turning more into confetti. It'll do that once in a while, especially if this is too hot. If it's too hot, it'll do this every single time. And it's a bit more of a hassle because you need to get all that debris out of there. So in this case, just give it a blast of air. A lot of times it will come out. If you notice it's sticking in there, you take one of the little cleaning brushes and clean it out. If you have debris on these blades, when this squeezes down on the ribbon, it will absolutely start breaking your fibers off. So again, everything has to be clean. And one thing with this, if I turn it this way, where these guide rails are, you can see there's pockets in here. If you're not careful, or there's a lot of debris that gets in those pockets, what will happen is this will not be able to seat all the way. It pretty much closes up here. If there's a lot of dirt in there and debris, this will stay open a little bit. The problem with that is when you strip it, the amount of plastic that's still showing here will be longer. And what happens is when the machine brings the fibers in for alignment, the edge of that plastic will hit the blocks that these V grooves are in. And we've seen it happen where it'll try to bring them in and it'll be straight, and on the screen you'll just see them bend and they won't be in alignment. And it's a subtle difference, but again, you need to be clean in your work. So you don't want debris in here. This has to operate properly and close all the way. And that being said, this is just repetitive here. I'll clean that. Flick it a few times. If you flick near the end of it, it doesn't matter even if your finger's dirty. That's going to be the scraps, so it doesn't matter. You don't want to get the other parts dirty. Reset the cleaver. Give that a few turns. Snap that in. Make sure that you're seated all the way. And there we go. And again, on this side, depending on how you want to maneuver your sled or chuck, but you're basically coming around and making this turn. And there's no twists introduced in here. And another thing to keep your eye on, when you set it in the machine, before you splice, make sure that there wasn't a mistake made. If this ribbon was in this chuck inverted, or for the other side, you're going to have your ribbon spliced backwards, which is obviously not good. And if you have a lot of butt splices and you have a flipped ribbon somewhere, it's not as easy to find. You'll have to open up every case and examine things to see what the deal is. So if you're careful and you just eyeball that real quick to make sure both of your ribbons are in the proper orientation, and hit the set button. Some of these cleaves actually don't look very good here. Now, I guess this is good. If the cleave angles are off, and this was the one on the left side, it just didn't cleave well, it'll say large cleave angle. When you're dealing with ribbon, it's harder to get away with an error that you force to ignore and just splice it. But in this case, we'll try, but generally what I would do here is I would re-cleave this left one. Strip off a little bit more. With ribbon, it gets very difficult to tray if one ribbon you have problems with and it gets too short. It's almost the same as single when you have fibers that are uneven lengths, but it's much worse trying to tray these plastic ribbons if one of them ends up being real short. So when you strip back, you may not do that full strip length. All you really need is for it to be long enough so that your glass lands on this second pad, instead of being long enough to be drawn into the trash can, just to try to save your length, especially if you had to do this multiple times. You don't want to keep stripping a long length and having that ribbon get just shorter and shorter quickly. So what I end up doing is, if I have to strip it again a few times, I will keep it long enough for the glass to reach the second pad so it can properly cleave it. But all your scraps are not going to be drawn into the trash can, so you'll have to blow this out, get your debris out, your scraps out of there. In this case, we're just going to try. The machine is pretty good at dealing with cleaves that aren't perfect. If there was an offset, and we'll try to introduce one of those errors so you can see what it looks like. An offset is something you really shouldn't try to push through, but we'll see what happens here. So if I hit the set button again, it will ignore this error and force a splice. You want to be cognitive of that, because if you didn't want to do that, like say I pulled this out and re-cleaved it, once I pull the chucks out of there, it will reset this. But if I hit set, it's going to force a splice. If I hit reset and then hit set, it did what it said, it reset, but I should get the same cleave angle error. You just want to be reminded that depending on what the error is, if you want the machine to try again without forcing the splice, hit reset first. In this case, we're going to try to splice this just to see what happens. And there we go. This will highlight all the ones that had bad cleaves, but all our losses are well within spec. So when it comes to the cleaves not being horrendous, a lot of times you can get by. But what I would suggest, especially because ribbon is harder to repair and to have to come back and redo things, so take care of any issues now. Excuse me. But I'll go back and just take a closer look at the splices themselves to make sure there's nothing glaring. All the cores look to be in alignment. There's nothing really bulging or crooked, so I would keep this. And based on the losses, we should be fine with that. But if you're really in question, rather than go through this whole part of arcing them and everything, just pull it out, restrip it, and get a better cleave. These cleavers themselves, the blade doesn't last nearly as long before you have to rotate it. Every time you cleave, you're going across 12 fibers, so these blades get rotated much more often. And I'll tell you this, a good indicator of when the blade is starting to get dull, you may get all of them cleaved, but they don't get drawn into the trash can. I don't know why that is, but you'll find that they're bunched up over here, but that's a good indicator the blade is starting to get dull. And if that happens more often, you'll have to rotate the blade, and I'll show that later on how to do that. So at this point, we're keeping that. So you hit the open and close. Same thing. I hold that down, get that flipped open. I'll hold it again here just to slide this closer. A little bit of tension. Get this side opened up. Center the sleeve and straight down into the oven. Now at this point, you can work on the other side, and you could even get this laid into the machine. Do not do the second side until this is out of the oven and over here. The reason for that is because your back ribbon will end up getting wrapped around here, and it makes it harder to tray. There's a lot of little details with plastic ribbon that you really should follow to make your life easier. In this case, because we're moving slower, this is already going to be out of the oven and over here. If it's still warm, just lay it there. But as long as that's out of the way, you can definitely work with the ribbon that's on the other side. If this is still in the oven, do not do this side until that comes out of the oven. All right, at this point, I'm going to get more fiber spliced, and we'll come back with that chip being full, and I'll show you how to tray it.